Here we are again, Tim, for another Friday, another fun podcast. We kind of left it last week where we were going to think through this week in terms of how we kind of wanted to approach the coming year. And let me tell you what just happened this week. A nice little coincidence. I have, as I mentioned to you, I wrote a blog a couple years ago now, I'm going to say this, 156 blog posts, all on the PMBOK 6, kind of all through all of the different processes within the PMBOK process. And I had a nice, after a couple of years, I had someone come into one of my blog posts and leave me a message that said, "This makes sense. Finally, someone goes from the technical to the practical," is in essence what this reader or reviewer said. And it got me thinking, based on the challenge you gave me last week, that maybe that's the tact we take for this coming year, is we get away from a lot of the process orientation and really focus on the human approach to what we do as project managers.
And not only human, but human actionable. It's basically what, not just what can we understand, but what can we do to make things better. That's what I'm interested in too. So with that in mind, what do you want to talk about this next year? And let's freeze that. What do project managers and business need to consider and address in order to make meaningful decisions in 2023 through 2024?
Well, that's a loaded question. And the reason I say that is, we have alluded to that at some point through our previous podcasts. And I'm not sure it's so much what do we need to do. I think what we need to do is see what business is going through in terms of the disruption that's going on in the business environment, and kind of tag along behind that, not as a lagging indicator, but as a parallel partner indicator with our business counterparts.
So you're talking about a lot of things all at once: business and environmental factors. And so basically what we're saying is business needs to respond to environmental factors in order for business to be relevant. And how can we actually help our projects and the people working around and in the projects relevant for business as well as the world?
That's where I'm going. Think about it from this perspective. Even since you and I started this podcast process a couple of years ago, what's happened, right? I mean, the worldwide pandemic hit, and I'm not even talking about what we as project managers deal with. I'm talking about what our business counterparts are dealing with. So the pandemic hit radically. There was a remote workforce got set up. There's all sorts of repercussions as a result of the way the remote workforce is being managed or has been managed. There's this new, and this one caught us, I think many of us by surprise. There's the whole idea of artificial intelligence. So if you think about it from that perspective, and we can probably spend most of the show just on this conversation. Yeah. Imagine what's happened to business.
Yeah, and let's just crank up the volume a little bit more. You were talking about that. How about supply chain?
Oh yeah.
How about economic and political unrest? How about all the other factors? We're just beginning to understand how all three of these things, much less everything else, are fitting together. And it's creating a volatility. And here I am as a project manager. You think this is, that's just noise, distraction outside of the company. But think about it, if everybody is going through this. I have seen such a change in the culture of my students over the last 2 years. It was wonderful. But when the pandemic first came down and we hit lockdown, and it was like, everybody has to be in the house. It was really stable, and everybody said, we're going to put up with this and everything's fine. And now we're out and we should be happy and everything's goofier than anything. I commiserate with project managers because I find myself as a teacher spending as much time to get adults to sit in their seats and listen as maybe a grade school teacher does.
Well, and think about also from the perspective that hit business, it also hit us. Now, technically, as project manager and as IT suppliers to our customers, we recovered quickly. I know in one huge project I was on, and I'm talking a project in the size of roughly $300 million. Within 3 days, they had migrated from a in-office 200 to 300 person project to everyone at home and everything working through the cloud. So from an IT perspective, they kept up with their business counterparts having to also work remotely. But here were the unintended, unforeseen consequences. I think you used the word, we can put up with this, and we did. But what happened? No longer did we have cohesive teams collaborating, having lunches together, going out for a sandwich after work or a drink after work. No longer did we have those kinds of neat social kind of constructs that we like on our projects. And part of what you observed with your students, I think, is a result of that degeneration of the social construct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I allude to it in my classes as a transition from solitude to isolation. This collaborative component, we didn't realize how important it was until we didn't have it. And I'm still convinced, it's not a face-to-face collaboration. It's more of something else. That's a social need that's going unfulfilled, and we still haven't put our finger on it.
Well, think about, you and I we're doing this podcast. We converse several times a week, but when was the last time you and I shook hands? You just from that perspective, right? So yeah, we can collaborate face to face over Zoom, but we haven't physically broke bread together or even shook hands.
Yeah. Isn't that wild? So like you said, it's, we're going through a whole different paradigm shift in how we can work together and how we can fulfill our needs. And let's put that back in the scope of project management. As project managers, we have to figure out the engagement of our teams. And we're learning so much that it has to do so much with human behavior and understanding of people as individuals and groups. It's just magnifying what you and I started with on season 2.
Well, and from a business perspective, when business went remote and IT caught up fairly quickly going remote, I think in some ways IT got ahead of business in terms of being able to be able to communicate over Zoom or over Teams or whatever. But from the whole perspective of being able to do this, there was still that lacking sense of bonding. And how many times have you been on a video call with one of your clients or your students, and everyone has their cameras turned off?
Mm-hmm.
So not only are we not face to face, we don't even know if those people are paying attention or if they're just lying back or if they're doing the latest Wordle for the day.
Yeah, and I don't want to overcomplicate this, but now with the advent of AI, how can we tell what's real?
Yes.
We're not just in the thick of it. We're just scratching the surface right now with this weird stuff. So like I said, with this new season, we have these interesting facts that we learned. We had these environmental things that we couldn't control that we had to respond to. And we had business taking that right-hand turn. And we're beginning to realize humans can't take a right-hand turn like computers do. So what are we going to do? And I think that would be some of the most valid conversations and some of the most valuable conversations we can have in the next year.
Well, and along that very same line, here's what I was thinking too. This is one place where we may have leapfrogged business. Both of us, both business and IT, were ill-equipped to manage remotely. But I think IT may have gotten ahead of it because our team structures and everything was largely in place, tasks, schedules, everything was in place. So outside of the social construct of what we do as teams on projects, we still had those sorts of things going for us. And maybe part of what we need to talk about and brainstorm is how can we as IT, having learned from remote management, pass on lessons learned to our business counterparts?
I would enjoy that. I've looked at this phenomenon and I have not seen it discussed yet. I'm starting to wrap my head around just what you're talking about. The advent of looking at the position of not personal relationships in the workspace, but professional relationships, and how we can actually define that term, and we can actually create, that fulfillment of not just the social needs, but also the respect needs and the other needs like safety that were going unfulfilled.
Yeah, it's just incredibly complex and yet probably simple if we really put our minds to it and just kind of work through it.
So let's think about breaking this down into pieces, okay?
Yeah.
Let's start with one factor. What are the influences you see that are impacting the way businesses function today? So we have businesses that are service oriented, businesses that are product oriented, and they both have supply chains and they've gotten really complex. And then on top of that, we have all the support functions and this age of not just contracting and subcontracting, but the whole concept of entrepreneurship, where we have, you have relationships emerging and merging and changing and going away. So we see this, what's happening in the way businesses are functioning right now, just from top of mind.
Just from top of mind, I think they're starting to recover, but slowly, from not being available or not being at work, for example. I mentioned earlier the phenomenon of something that I've been reading about called quiet quitting. A lot of what that resulted from is because of the whole remote management that was done poorly. So I think one of the things that we are facing right now is exactly that. How do we re-engage the workforce? How do we keep them from now leaping from this business to the next business, or from my project to another project, just because I can do that with a flip of a webcam?
Yeah, and let's even go further. I remember back between the time of 2011 2013, I was actually working upgrading cell towers, and we had in the middle of 17 projects, we had to switch from a copper cable provider up in Boston, Massachusetts, to somebody down in Florida. And all of a sudden, we had to literally trade from a cost constraint to a schedule constraint. And that took 3 days of really painful deliberation. And now we're just beginning to learn that these are happening almost on a daily basis. And how are we going to actually provide not just the human resources stability, but the physical resources stability? And this is not just a concern. This is not just a risk. This is a reality for many of our industries right now.
Well, and not only that, is how do we help our business counterparts? How do we help our teams when technology now is changing so quickly? I built systems. I didn't build. I managed teams that built systems that stayed around for over 20 years. I don't think that's even possible now as quickly as technology changes. So part of what we need to do as IT professionals to help ourselves and our business counterparts is to keep up. And I'm not even sure how to keep up. You and I discussed last week how the AI phenomenon kind of caught all of us flat-footed. We did not see that coming as quickly as it did.
I thought about a couple things as you were mentioning this, and you're taking us through those stepping stones. What if it isn't keeping up? We're not in a survival mode, that's for sure. We've actually demonstrated this isn't a survival situation, at least for most of the world. But on another, mindset, we feel like we're struggling to keep ahead. Maybe what it is not a change in tools that can keep us ahead, but a set of attitudes and how we use these tools to keep up with. So maybe what we will be exploring with these factors is, once again, a behavioral change in attitude and mindset, not necessarily, keeping ahead of these waves.
Well, I like that. And I'll tell you, let me go one step further. What if we harnessed those technologies, those changes, and facilitate them in such a way that we're using them for the benefit of our clients and for the benefit of our project teams, rather than have those phenomenon steer us into directions we're not prepared for?
Exactly.
Yeah.
A really good example for this is, okay, so we're going to work remotely. Instead of defining the actual tools we need, we define the needs, and we approach these as, we don't have the perfect solution, but as we progress through, we'll get better and better and better.
Which is the job of an IT professional, an IT project manager, right?
And here it is. Maybe this mindset is not just good for project managers. Maybe the project manager's real role is to actually be the facilitator and demonstrate these things and train the people around them in this attitude and mindset. We're known very well for our patience, for our cunning, for our ability to slow things down and be rational and be critical. And maybe what we can do is actually not just do these things and demonstrate them, but maybe we can proliferate them. Maybe everybody can start thinking like a project manager.
And have the project managers, I hear what you're saying, have the project managers then influence their partners in such a way that we are at the table with business. And that's been happening, I think, over the years, but I think we really can use this opportunity to become true partners of our business counterparts, so that we can truly influence and be influenced as we solve problems.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that we'll still have contracts, and we'll still have business, and we'll still have these terms that are formal and have very crisp definition that formal business needs. But I really do believe that we're going to be moving away from partner, which is more of a legal term, which has commitment and obligation. Maybe we'll have something like fellow travelers, and see if we can get more, by joining our resources and our energy, have more satisfaction on at least this part of the trip. Maybe that's all that we need to do as project managers for our project success.
Well, and that makes a lot of sense. Let me give you a kind of a small microcosm example of this from my own experience. When I came into a fairly large project, one of my jobs responsibilities was to come alongside the business users and get them prepared for implementation. And part of that preparation meant that they had to do the user acceptance test of the technology, of the system that was being presented to them. Now, a lot of the business users that I inherited as a part of this task were people who are used to working on legacy system testing. So a change had come through, and they'd go and pound the keyboard for a while, and they'd say, yeah, it works, or no, it doesn't work. And that was their picture, their vision of system testing or acceptance testing. And part of where I'm going with this is, I took 8 or 9 months, pulled together a team of 20 people, and showed them how to go through permutations and combinations and write test scripts and write end-to-end scripts and be able to document the defects in such a way that the IT folks could pick those defects up and make the changes quickly without many more questions, things that they had never been exposed to. But it took 8 to 9 months, and it took my time to teach them. And I think that's where you were going. We as project managers come alongside our business counterparts. We teach them and bring them alongside to the point where, by the way, I worked myself out of a job.
Well, what happens is the same thing that happens in business. Once you become effective with this strategic approach to work, all of a sudden, new opportunities at a new level happen. If you actually train people to take over your work, that's called delegation.
Yeah.
And what it does is it frees you to another level of playing that, number one, inside of companies gives you promotion. Number two, outside of companies in entrepreneurship, it offers you opportunity for not just scale, but a richness and depth in the type of work that you can get to. It's the difference between being a line manager and an executive, basically.
Well, and the beautiful part of what you just talked about and what my experience showed is that when I checked back on my team members several years later, most of the ones that had been as part of that training and really took it to heart were promoted beyond their wildest imaginations from 3 to 4 years earlier than that. So I found that quite interesting.
What I'd like to explore, and this is what I'd like to be doing in the next year, is thinking about what are the things I as a project manager need to be relevant in.
Yeah.
What do I have to pay attention to outside the project and even outside the company? And secondly, how do I actually select and build the tools that allow me to maintain relevance? Like you said, thinking more strategically, being able to lead larger and more experienced and more confident groups, and these tools that we don't often have time for in project management, like delegation. What do you see that we need to look and to stay not ahead of the curve, but at least be able to ride the waves that are coming across our environment?
Well, let me start with your premise from a little bit ago around mindset. How many projects have you been on? I know I have been on where the project manager and their teams become order takers. And we've talked about this before, where the client said, I needed to do this and I'd like it to do it this way. And the project manager or the responsible systems analyst writes it down and goes away and develops that. And then here's my favorite words from end users. I know what I told you, but that's not what I wanted.
Yep.
So then what happens is the order taker goes, well, that'll be a change request because I did what you said. And so the mindset part that I'm coming to is we need to become such solid partners that we know the business as well as business knows their business, which is a different mindset than expecting our business counterparts to understand IT as well as we understand IT.
This means going from being a project manager to being an advisor and a consultant. There was a time for about 7 years that everybody was using the word trusted advisor. That's earning a certain level of rapport and relationship such that they seriously consider any advice you provide.
Well, and I'm looking at my bookshelf right now, and I have a book on my bookshelf called The Trusted Advisor.
That's right. That's right. It still is a meaningful term, and I don't think it's going to go away. I think this advisory role, this ability to set aside time and treat these human and group needs in such a way that, number one, we understand them, and number two, we're able to, through power and influence, create a stability that, we all can sit down together, take a breath, and gather our resources and our strategies to see what we can come up with.
Well, and just let's go back to a couple of sessions that we had in season 2, and that's to deal with how how PMI had changed from PMBOK 6 to PMBOK 7. And a lot of what you had just talked about, I think PMI somehow realized that, yes, they were very process oriented and that those instructions worked, but somehow in PMBOK 7, they came around to what you and I like to call the people aspects or the human factors of project managers. And it seemed like some of the emphasis changed. Do you think they understood? I mean, this happened before the pandemic, but do you think that PMI understood that they needed to make that change along the lines of what you're just talking about?
I'm going to say yes, but I'm going to ask you a question. 2015, PMI comes up with the talent triangle, and they say, we can't just focus on process. We're going to have to double down in the next 7 years on leadership and understanding business. And then within 2 years, they change the exam content outline. And they say, now we're not going to break the exam up by initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling. Now we're going to break it up by people, process, and business. And now in 2020 and 2021, PMI says, guess what? It's not just those 3, but it's those 3 when we really understand the work and we can put together a plan. That's traditional project management, as well as, we have to be adaptive. Yeah. We have to be self-organizing down to each and every member of the team. And so I didn't just think that, they knew what was coming. I think that they know what's coming over the next 10 or 20 years. And that's the conversations I'm having, both with PMI and with my students. This is a fascinating area. And this is what I'd like to explore. PMI got it right. And I want to see what else PMI has up their sleeves for the next 10 years.
PMI got it so right that I cheered. because one of the, and I don't want to bash PMI because I think it's a wonderful organization, but in the earlier years, one of my complaints was that anybody who was a good test taker could get their PMP certification. And so to me, it cheapened the whole PMP certification process. Now with this kind of, and it's almost a right turn to what you had just been talking about, and where they're dealing more with the people aspects of project management. I think this is going to make true project managers out of those who want to manage projects, more than just process people, more than just arts and charts people, but truly project managers who care about their teams and who are able to encourage, influence, and help them deliver on time and within budget.
So here we are. You and I both understand that this transition can benefit from a greater investment in understanding not just how business functions, but how human behavior works, and what we call emotional intelligence. Now, my question to you is, do you think the tools are changing how we're doing this, or do you think actual human behavior is changing?
I think human behavior, especially what we've observed as a result of the pandemic and the remote work style, I think that has changed. I think people aren't as cohesive and as collaborative as they used to be, and we can make that happen. I think the tools, we can adjust the tools to help manage those situations. I had a boss who used to say, a fool with a tool is still a fool. So it's not the tool that makes the project manager, it's the project manager who uses the tool to influence and to help their team progress. So I think you're hitting on something correctly, and that is that human behavior is changing. We as project managers can influence that by using the appropriate tools when necessary.
And we are going to need to explore this because I see it in a different direction.
Okay, good. I want to hear this.
Yeah, this is going to be fun because I think that within context of our culture and within context of the last 60 years of history, I think human behavior is changing. But I think overall of human society, we're behaving just the way humans always have. I think human behavior is stable to a point. Now, this means that I'm going to task myself with bringing evidence of this, but I think you and I can have some really interesting conversations here.
Well, and as you do your research, I'd like to ask the question, is it human behavior that's stable, or is it the predictable reaction of humans to a specific kind of occurrence that's stable?
Yeah, there's some correlation there that we have to look at, and we have to think about causation also. You're exactly right. You're exactly right.
As you were saying that, I'm reminded of, you've been in those lectures where the professor or the speaker will say something along the lines of, who said this? Give me the name of the person who made this quote. Today's youth are disrespectful. Today's youth are lazy. You go through that and people start guessing, was it this person of 2019? Was it this person? And then they'll finally say, no, it was this philosopher from the year 600 BC.
Yeah. And we're back to the whole thing that history may not repeat itself. We can't really compare ourselves, but it has these correlated behaviors. And that's what I'd like to look at. Maybe you and I in the next year can pull apart from our research and our discussions these little threads of wisdom that we can actually offer our listeners.
Well, and to keep our project managers and wannabe project managers, to keep them listening, we'll obviously relate that to how we as IT project managers can respond to those behaviors.
Okay. So we have a big task.
Yeah, we do. What have we just done to ourselves?
Yeah. So what we're looking at is we have a big conversation. We're going to have to look at number one, the business environment, what's going on there. We're going to have to look at our understanding of human behavior. And we're going to have to look at business and what business currently is doing and behaving as, and sort of tie those things together in such a way that we can say, aha, this makes sense. And here's what we think is a great way to proceed. And I'm not just talking about general items. I'm talking about, we have an opportunity to say, how do we prepare our projects and our organizations in such a way that we can be resilient as we get these unknown crises and issues that continue to hit us.
Even if they're small crises and small issues.
Oh boy.
They're still disruptive. They still can disrupt the project.
Yeah.
But,
so what would you like to see? What do you, let me ask you, as I ask all my clients in my projects, okay? At the end of this season, what do you see as success? Or how do you define success when we're done with this season?
So let me back up just a touch to answer this question. So the last couple of years, we were much more about the fundamentals of project management, adding in the human behaviors as we saw them, using examples in our own war stories, our own successes, our own failures. What I would like to see is almost a flip of that, where we come at it from a human problem, a human success, a human story, and apply the IT to those situations. And so what I would like to see at the end of this project, or at the end of our season, is project management listeners to us who are much more well-rounded in their ability to manage their projects.
Yes. In our classes, we talk about critical thinking. We talk about emotional intelligence, but do we have examples? I'm talking about in the classroom as educators of project management, in our work environments. We talk about mentorship, we talk about succession planning, and we talk about professional relationships, but do we have examples? Do we have opportunities to experiment? And this is what I'd like to actually play with. How do we shape our project and our work environment such that, we can come up with these great theories and ideas, but how do we bring them into the office and actually use them and at least have a chance to evaluate them?
Yeah. And, bringing theories allows us to brainstorm. Bringing ideas that we've actually experienced allows us to teach from true experience. It doesn't mean, Tim, that you have to do it exactly as I did it. But maybe you can take from my learning and from my experience something that you can apply in your own way on your project. So again, we are not cookie cutters, you and I. We're just a couple of gray-haired guys who've been around the block and made our share of mistakes.
Let me add one more option to this. Let's not reject crazy ideas. Okay. Let's go with crazy ideas. You know why? I found this worked out so well in brainstorming sessions when I was in the office. Because everybody's going to say that's a crazy idea, and then I would let it fester for a little bit. And then one or two people would say, yeah, that's crazy, but you know what? That reminds me, or that gave me an idea. Yeah. So as we go through this, let's capture crazy ideas and mark them as crazy, but don't use them as a destination, but a jumping off point for more brainstorming.
Well, in fact, I was going to say while you were introducing that crazy ideas is equivalent to brainstorming, because my crazy idea may be your, wow, that makes sense. I remember being in a brainstorming session one time where somebody threw out a really flippant answer. I mean, just a stupid flip, just to be a smart aleck. If people are familiar with that term, smart aleck, just to be a wisecracker, right? And it stuck. People go, that will work. So I agree with you. Crazy ideas are useful.
These are the moments that you actually look back and say, this is when that crazy happened and things changed for the better.
But think about it. You asked me that question, what I'd like to see at the end of the season. Well, think about it from this perspective. Project managers need to be ethical in their dealings with team and consultant. Do we ever really teach project managers that? Project managers need to become good negotiators. Do we ever teach project managers how to negotiate? I'll give you one more. Project managers need to have a sense of humor. What if we did an entire show just on helping people understand what it means to develop a sense of humor? Or at least part of a show. I mean, those are the kinds of things that PMBOK doesn't teach you, that 45 textbooks on project management won't teach you, but a couple of old guys who have been there, done that, and failed and succeeded can teach you because they have lived it.
Exactly. I'm really excited about this model. Now, what are the initial discussion topics? I know we're talking about human behavior, and I really like what you're saying is we talked about process and we looked at human behavior against it. And now we can talk about human behavior and look at process against that. And we have this whole background, basically the wallpaper in our room is saying this is the business environment. Now, within that idea, what would you like to bring to the show? Just let's just for like 3 or 4 minutes, let's just throw out some topics. You have some good ones there, right? Levity, conflict management, negotiation, all these other tools, ethics. Yeah. Oh boy, I would love to talk about ethics.
How about culture? I mean, we have explored it a little bit, but if you think about our teams, I've had teams with with team members from Asia, from Europe, from the Mid East, from Northern England and Ireland, from the British Isles, from Canada, from the US, from Mexico, all on the same team. I mean, talk about bringing some cultural interest to a project.
And not just recognizing it, but how about what happens in a project when you embrace it and celebrate it?
Yes.
You know, this is like a potluck.
Yeah.
You know, this is eating family style, but eating from like 5 continents family style when you get into these social interactions. It's and how do you actually pivot from these silos that we're in right now to a model like what you're talking? And I think you and I both have had, you know, these galvanizing experiences that actually said, this is when that happened.
Yeah. How about, you and I talk a lot about the need for project managers to have emotional intelligence, to have a high EQ. What if we just, and what people don't understand, a lot of project managers, a lot of IT people who are stereotypically kind of logical and not emotional, if you want to look at it from that perspective, we're often tagged with the fact that we're not self-aware. Well, part of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. We could do an entire podcast or two just on how do I, as a project manager, understand how to become self-aware and how to actually implement that.
The roadmap to it.
Yeah.
That roadmap to becoming self-aware, the roadmap to emotional intelligence. I think that's what people need. And we can look at that same approach to things like critical thinking. We can take it to debate. We can take it to all these other aspects, and it doesn't have to stop there too. You know, we can actually bring these other technical and technological things into place, like meetings.
Yeah.
And we look at meetings, and we can actually have a whole show just on meetings and how meetings have changed and why they've changed and how we can take advantage of these and how we can actually go from point A to point B.
Something as simple as storytelling. You and I like to tell our little vignettes, but are we in fact consistent with answering for our audience what's in it for them as a result of the story we're sharing?
Yep, exactly.
Again, do you see a project schedule in what I just said? And one more thought, well, probably several, but one more thought that you had brought up several, and I remember this from probably a year and a half ago. You mentioned the role of the servant leader. That, so many project managers, I've seen this in my career, they make it to IT project manager or senior project manager, and suddenly they're beating their chest and walking around like, wow, I've made it. No, the only place you've made it is when you serve your team, not lorded over your team. And so there's another interesting topic.
And you know what? The 7th edition of the PMBOK is using a term, stewardship.
Nice.
We don't have a definition for that inside of a business context yet.
Nice.
People are using it, but I have yet to find, and I'd like to explore those as well. So there are aspects of, human behavior in tools discussions, but I think looking from human behavior as a class or as a series of shows in itself. And we can go as deep as we want. You want to talk about, what are the neurochemicals that drive human behavior? What are the patterns that have just been emerging in the last 10 years where we understand how and why groups form and they don't in certain situations? I think we can have just a ball with this discussion.
You just reminded me, I have a very good friend who has done neuroscience research and speaks on that. Why don't we at some point bring on guests who are expert in the field that we're talking about?
Yes.
And then we become the interviewers and they become the exporters of information.
This is a unique opportunity. So we have in this show alone, we've actually said, here's what we did, here's where we are, and we don't know where we're going, but let's actually pull out the option. Now, this is going to take a little time for us to put together, I assume.
It will.
But let's start thinking about what we're doing, and maybe in the next one or two shows, let's talk about some type of framework within which we can build these episodes, so they can all lead us to, one or two or three truths. You and I believe that human behavior is a major component in how and why projects are successful or not. And also, we both believe that, we have to, as well as businesses have to be, more resilient. They need to be able to respond to these tragedies and traumas and these disruptions, not just weather them. And how do we do that? And so we're going to have to actually look at everything. We're going to have to take some off the table, but I think we have a year of shows easily that not only will be entertaining, but also will be fun to go through.
So you mentioned the last part you talked about in terms of being able to, I forget exactly the wording, but would we talk about adapting our
Yes.
style to human
Yes.
behavior? Yeah,
Exactly. It's that whole resilience is the word.
Yeah.
And that's the ability to recover. Basically, how long does it take for us to recover and get back to business?
I wish I had listened to us 20 years ago.
Well,
because I was taught that project management was schedules, timelines, budgets, timesheets, meeting schedule, all that. So that's how I was taught. Put your big chart on the wall, mark it off every week, do a nice status report, show where you've got blockers, show where you're doing well. That was project management in my mind. But I think that's just the foundation. That's just the fundamental. I think there's much more. Well, based on our discussion today, I know there's much more to the art and the toolkit that we as project managers need to use. Yeah.
There's the tools, which are the structure. There's the process, which is the framework. And what we can actually explore is this. And let's actually call it what it is. Our audience is the future us, and they are where we were. And I'd like to continue this discussion in such a way that we treat them with the respect that we wanted to be treated with. So the diligence that I have to actually approaching this is going to have to be a lot more serious. And I think we're going to have some really interesting ideas and information to provide our audience in the next few months.
I may have to go back and resurrect my blog because
good for you.
Because I can see if we do this well, or as we do, I don't want to say if, when we do this well, and we can blog about it, both you and I, we will get more and more comments like the one I experienced this week, where the person came back and said, wow, this makes sense. This is actually practical and I can use this.
Perfect.
Yeah, love it.
I'm in 150% alignment with you. So for this next week or two, as we prepare for our next show, where can we find you?
Well, you can't find me anywhere, Tim, because I'm going on vacation.
Good for you.
But I may once in a while poke in on LinkedIn just to see what's going on.
I'm jumping in and out of small conversations on LinkedIn, but that's primarily where you can find me and connect with me. We'll see where we're going in the next year, because I'm getting some real hunches where people are talking not just about project management, but the topics that we brought up today. And I'd like to actually bring some of those into our conversation as well.
Well, and as we adapt to the topics that come through, could we say that we're being agile?
Yes, we are. Well, again, it's always a pleasure to interact with you on these shows and in our preparation of our material. So I look forward to this new year and our structure of business and process and human behavior. And I'm can't wait to see where we take this.
Great. All right. Until we come back again, we'll see you same place, same channel.
Thanks again, Merv, and thanks
All right.
everyone.